It's something, something new every day.
Every day, revolutionary.
Yeah.
Well, I was really glad we were able to get you two together here to talk about your work.
Hopefully, yeah.
You touched on this binary idea.
No, I think it's a very exciting idea. I'm not sure I totally agree with it, but
fair enough, you know.
There are aspects to it which are potential.
Welcome very much to Conversations, where it's a pleasure indeed to welcome two gentlemen to the program that have been guests in the past, but I'm happy to welcome them back together now on a program. They have been singular guests in the past, but on my far left, if I may, is Dr. Edward Wolff. And Dr. Wolff is a professor of economics at the New York University here in New York City. And if I may say so, he is one of our, if not perhaps the leading expert in terms of quantifying the disparity of wealth and income in the American and world societies and the trends therein. And Dr. Wolff, welcome really very much to Conversations, and thank you very much for coming into the program.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me back again.
Not at all. It's a pleasure. And on my immediate left is Rodney Shakespeare, and Rodney Shakespeare also has been a guest of the program in the past, and he is visiting us from London, England, and he is the co-author of a book called Binery Economics, the New Paradigm, and we're going to be wanting to talk about that, and we'll be showing those books upcoming in the program. But Rodney, welcome very much to Conversations as well.
Nice to be back, Howard. Thank you.
Yes. I wonder if we could maybe we start with you, Rodney, if we could. Binery Economics, and here maybe we could just show what the book looks like here. This is what the book looks like in the paperback edition, and it's called Binery Economics, the New Paradigm, and as you can see, the author is co-authored by Rodney Shakespeare along with Robert Ashford here in the United States, but this is what the book looks like, and it's called, again, as I say, Binery Economics, the New Paradigm. What do you and Robert have in mind when you say the new paradigm? Maybe you can start off with what do we mean and clearly understand what a paradigm is, and then relate that in terms of the understanding of economics, which are so important now to the operation of the sociological and political systems by which this whole planet is trying to move ahead. But what do you mean when you say the new paradigm?
Well, you spotted that there should be an emphasis on the word the or the on the actual title page. Due to the fact it's in italics, we couldn't solve the technical problems. But there can be only one major new paradigm, because a paradigm is something that has to fit the facts. It has to resolve all the information, has to rest on reasonable assumptions. It has to make sense. And so the likelihood of there being two substantial views encompassing a body of information and a body of assumptions is most unlikely. So if there is going to be a new paradigm, it's something which comes along when the old information, the old explanations are patently starting to become obsolete. And along comes a new explanation which you find more satisfactory. You look at both explanations and you choose as to which one you feel is the more satisfactory.
It's sort of coming off, Thomas Kuhn wrote about that, and the idea is that the whole body of thinking that comes into a sort of, in a sense, system that posits against a system that had been in a wide-scale sense accepted from the historical model. Is that sort of what we mean when we say a paradigm? It's one of those words that's used a great deal, but maybe it's good to get an idea, a definition of what a paradigm itself is. It's a large body of thought.
Well, the best example is that at one stage the world was viewed as being the center of the universe, and the observations of the sun and the stars and the planets appeared to actually confirm that. And it made sense, and then as the optical devices showed that the movements of the planets, for example, weren't quite what were thought to be, the conventional explanation made more and more complicated explanations in an attempt to uphold the existing paradigm or the existing view of reality.
The heliocentric view, which historically had been the case.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And then there were all sorts of political and social institutions that ultimately got their power from that view of the world. And then when Copernicus and others made observations which didn't quite suggested that something was a bit wrong, they realized that the only way to resolve this was to make this new counter-explanation.
Yeah.
But of course, in doing so, they put in their lives on the line.
Yeah, and it was, and Galileo had to do time, I think.
Indeed,
you know,
he
and
did-
you know,
he
and
did
was
time.
and he wasn't only until 1992 or something that the Catholic Church finally came around and fully accepted the,
But
you know, the heliocentric view.
But the Pope at the time of Galileo probably understood, and he ensured that Galileo's punishment was commuted to life imprisonment.
Yeah, right, for having had a new paradigm. So it can be tricky business being invaded with these paradigm shifts, because people do, after all.
And
people-
dangerous.
Yeah, it can
It can
be
be,
dangerous,
yes.
but
Yes.
people have their identities wrapped up in those paradigm
Identities
systems.
and power, and quite right.
Yeah, or even the individuals that have that, perhaps also, you know.
Yes.
But so now, what do you see? Well, you're saying the binary economics. What is it that you see? Maybe just you know, in a thumbnail way. What is the component of the new system as opposed to what is the traditional or conventional wisdom or the conventional thinking that you see that makes the analysis that you put forth in the book new in a paradigm sense?
All conventional economics, all traditional economics, from left to right of the economic spectrum, through the middle, all of it is based upon some version of what is called the labour theory of value, which essentially identifies labour as being playing a substantial, if not total part in production. Now, at various times, conventional economics denies that, and it claims that it does understand the part of capital. But their explanation is often confused, and it obfuscates and contradicts itself, and is not consistent. At the end of the day, it is a fair statement that all forms of conventional economics use the labour theory of value as an explanation of what produces the wealth. Now, hence everything is largely done in terms of capital, and hence conventional economics says it does not, in terms of labour, I'm sorry, and it says, conventional economics says it does not matter who owns the capital. Now, in binary economics, it identifies much more accurately, not perfectly, much more accurately who or what does the work. And it observes that in this situation and that situation, in this task or that task, productive capital is doing a percentage of the work. And having observed that this work is being done by capital, it deduces that if you are to be genuinely productive, it is rather important that you and I as individuals should own a part of that productive capital. But at the moment, of course, conventional economics says, oh, it doesn't matter if the capital is narrowly owned.
Is this true, Edward, in your view, that conventional economics thinks that it doesn't matter, the ownership pattern, and that they distribute wealth, I mean income, primarily through labor or job criteria, or
Well,
how does this strike you?
yeah, I would say two things in response.
Yes.
First of all, I think Rodney is quite correct that in conventional economics, it doesn't matter who owns the capital. In fact, it's immaterial whether it's owned by a single person or whether it's widely distributed. So it's really irrelevant to the working of the economy of the pattern of ownership. But I would have to disagree that that conventional economics does give a role to capital in the production process, at least in conventional neoclassical economics. In fact, there's a whole theory of capital services and the valuation of capital services, and the standard economic paradigm does place an important role on the action of capital in the production process.
Well, that is true, but there is the question as to whether it really provides an accurate understanding of the role. In binary economics, there's a concept called productiveness, and it is designed to more accurately establish what in the physical world does do the work. And it is the binary understanding that in total, 60 or 70, 75% of the gross productive output is essentially coming from capital. And it is the binary position that conventional economics does not wish to accept that, because if you were to accept the binary view, there would then be a challenge to the present pattern of capital ownership. And if you just think for a moment of the example as you move towards full automation, you cannot explain full automation fully automated factory by saying anything other than that it is totally the result of capital. And as the factory moves to full automation, conventional economics explains it as increasing productivity.
Well, we
which
hear
is,
that a lot.
It is, and ultimately, you analyze it, it is ultimately a form of labor productivity. But then as you move to that last stage and get to full automation, the whole explanation of conventional economics completely collapses. Labor productivity rises, and then to the point you get a full automation, it collapses again because there's no one working in the factory.
Well, it could still be seen in productivity terms as long as you have one guy turning the knob on, and then he would be
You have
1,000
one, you
times
have half a
productive.
guy, you can have a tenth of a guy,
Yeah.
the productivity rises to infinity, and then it goes down to naught.
Yeah, but I wonder, yeah, maybe we could add, you know, when we talk about economics, and when at least what you're positing is, maybe we should get it straight, because a lot of argumentation and discussion goes on between what we call the left and the right and that sort of thing. What you're talking is, you're talking about binary posited against virtually all systems, from Adam Smith to Ricardo to Keynes to Marx to you know, Schumpeter or Van Hayek or any of the people who are talking in the traditional realm of economics. You're positing that against the binary paradigm.
Well, if you look at the consequences of conventional economics in its various forms, on the left wing, you have the capital assets being controlled by a tiny percentage of the population. On the right wing, you have the capital assets being owned by a tiny percentage of the population, and in the middle, you have a mixture of a narrow group controlling and a narrow group owning. Well, binary economics, over time, nothing quick in binary economics, it leads to a situation where you get eventually 100% of the population individually owning capital. Now, that is something which just cannot be conceived in conventional terms.
Well, perhaps Edward Wolff is the best person that we have to talk about this, because he is the author. I want to show a couple of books that you have here. One is this one that he produced. This is a book that he called, which is particularly interesting, it seems to me. And then he's also the director of the review, publishes the review of Income and Wealth. And as I said earlier, we can show. Maybe we can get a little tighter on that. But he said that he is perhaps our leading expert in terms of understanding the distribution and disparities of wealth on the one hand and income on the other, and the distinction between the two. This is a journal that he is the editor of and puts out. And then I'd also show, while we're on the cameras, he's got a study that was done with the 20th century?
Yeah, now it's called the Century Foundation.
That's right, century. We've gone into the 21st century.
Right.
But it's called Top Heavy. And he argues in this that there's a concentration of ownership and wealth. But maybe he is the best person that we could draw upon in terms of what are the facts in terms of, on the one hand, wealth, or that is the ownership of, let's say, non-labor aspects of production, and income in the American and the world economy. What are the trends? It's pretty heavily concentrated, the ownership of capital assets, is it not? And how does it stack up against income?
Yeah, well, wealth in general, and by wealth we mean the assets that people own, including housing, real estate, unincorporated businesses, stocks, bonds, and so on. The richest 1% control close to 40% of the total value.
Is this in the American economy?
This is in the American economy, yes.
Yeah.
And now if we look just at stocks, it's even more concentrated. The richest 1% own close to 80% of the total value of stocks in the country. And
80% owned by the upper 1%.
by the, right.
And is there increasing concentration as you get up into the percentages of 1%? I mean, the people at the top. I mean, I think we had talked to you in the past that somebody like Mr. Gates has an absolutely incredible wealth compared to the rest of the society, to where it's almost ludicrous.
Right. Bill Gates alone owns as much wealth as 40% of the American population. We're talking about 40 million households, or close to 110 million people. So
good Lord.
He alone is...
That's amazing. And has it been this pattern that there's been a concentration of ownership of, let's talk about ownership of wealth or capital assets, that would it be safe to characterize it as, in a certain sense, on that aspect, as being close onto or resembling something that could be called a plutocracy in terms of the ownership of wealth?
Yeah.
Society is. It's not an economic democracy, it's an economic plutocracy, and has been.
Absolutely. I
All
think Marx was right on target when he talked about two distinct classes in our country: the capitalist class, the owners of the means of production, the owners of assets, and the working class, which are people who sold their labor and really didn't have much ownership stake in the means of production. Now, but I should say that it's not an absolute thing, and in fact, stock ownership has spread in this country. In fact, today, 48% of all households do own some stock. But a lot of them have very small stakes, and only about 30% of families in this country own more than $10,000 worth of stock.
I see, yeah. And would a good deal of that be through pension funds or retirement funds?
Most of it is, yeah,
mutual funds?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Most of it is not direct stock ownership, but rather ownership through, the most common form now is some kind of retirement account,
Yes.
like an IRA or a 401k.
Right.
And the second most common form is mutual funds.
Yeah. Okay. So there is a concentration of that. Now, we have a concentration of the capital ownership, but most in our, if I'm not mistaken, the basic policy grounding statement in the economic sphere is the Employment Act of 1946, which has not yet been revisited, as the Communications Act was to deal with the new information environment, but wasn't revisited. But it assumes that there will be movement toward employment, it was almost called the Full Employment Act, and that it assumes that we will distribute income to the mass of the people in our society by their having a labor relationship to production, and it gives great credence to the idea of labor input to production as the legitimate way for people to earn income. In fact, there's even been, if you have an earnings from capital ownership, it's been called unearned income by some people.
It's been a term of abuse.
Is there a problem in this? And yet it's just readily accepted by all our political leadership, our conventional leadership, intellectual and otherwise seems to be. And even it would seem to me, if I may, among many of your economic cohort, colleagues, is there a problem there, particularly as we begin to, as Rodney suggested, have more and more technological input to the productive process through time?
Well, I think you're exactly right that the primary piece of economic legislation in the country does put the whole emphasis on labor income and labor activity, and the notion of unemployment is that you're not at work, that you're not providing labor and therefore getting labor income. So the stated goal is to make sure that everyone has access to the labor market, everyone has a job.
Yes.
So you're exactly right, and I think Rodney is right to emphasize that nowhere in that document, or nowhere really in most of the economic legislation in our country, nowhere does it say anything about gaining access to ownership of these capital assets. That is, nowhere does it say that one goal of this country should be to make sure that not only does everyone have some form of labor income, but that everyone has some form of capital income as well.
And that is a big distinction and an important one that the, let's say, the intellectual community at large, or the socially responsible or concerned people ought to address in view of the technological avalanche of technological input to production now that is making this a time different than it was in Tom Jefferson's day, when all there was a hammer and 8 hours required to make a pair of boots. I mean, the technology and the capital assets are much more responsible for production, so there's a mismatch between the way people get income and the way things and services are actually produced.
Well, no, that's true, that capital has become much more important in the economy.
And owned by a handful of people.
But still owned by a handful of people. Well, let me qualify that.
Yes, please.
More people own some stake in it,
Yeah.
but it's still as concentrated in terms of ownership as it was 20 or 40 years ago.
Yeah.
But no, you're right that nowhere in the legislation or nowhere in our conventional view of the economy do people think in terms of providing ownership of capital to a vast segment of the population. and this is where I think binary economics has made a very important contribution to putting the emphasis on both providing labor services as well as providing providing an avenue to receive some of the income from capital as well.
Yeah, that's really very, very interesting, and particularly as the technology comes more and more to be responsible for the production. And it is a result. Through the longer haul, perhaps. We've been around 200,000 years, apparently, the human species, and the technology is increasing now exponentially, it seems, particularly in the realms of computers and so forth. So that technological, the technological input in a ratio with labor has changed through time. So that the reality, in a certain sense, is changing, so that our economic theorizing and the political expressions that would follow upon that would want to have some sort of a change that would be in keeping with the changes that have occurred up to this point?
Yeah, no, I agree. And in fact, the recent trend has been for capital income to become more and more important relative to labor income. The share of capital income in total national income has been rising over the last 20 years.
Or the input to production on the side of capital or on the side of non-labor aspects to production has increased tremendously, to where Rodney hints, or some people, I don't know how we get measurements of that, but it's to where it might be 70, 80% of the actual production is something other than labor, but we distribute to the folks, to everyone in the economy almost, in a legitimate sense, by a labor criteria or labor theory of value. In a
Yes.
sense, yeah?
Just on that, I think Edward is probably referring to the existing percentages of capital going to of income going to capital and to labour, and saying that has increased. The percentage going to capital has increased, though the binary concept of productiveness is designed to point out what happens in the real world, and then to say that in a binary economy it can be expected that the income going to capital would greatly increase. But certainly the existing figures are what you say. I mean, they do. Capital at the moment, the income going to capital does not reflect what binary economics believes is the physical output.
No, we have different ways that I mean, if they are responsible, just say for argument's sake, 75% of the production, then if things were wired right, or if things were established right in terms of the institutional structures and the relating of the folks to the way things are done, then perhaps 70% of the income for people to live, to buy food and shoes and so forth, would be coming from something other than their labor, and that's far from the case now. Most people only relate to their labor income as that by which they can make their way in the world, and that would be a very serious mismatch.
Well, you would expect in a binary economy there to be a full payout of capital's earnings, which would benefit everybody. And since everybody would be reliant, at least for part of their income, on a capital holding or a basket of shares, you will probably expect that in practice the percentages of income coming from capital will also increase. My guess would be about 40, 50 or 60, not necessarily 75. But there are other binary economists who believe that it will eventually go to 75, but only when everybody owns capital.
Yeah, and if you got to your full automated economy, as you said, you would have to have some alternate way of distributing income. And it brings up an issue that we have, that Bill Joy has this article. I could just, you don't even have to show it on the camera. I can just show it quick in the current Wire magazine on the stands. And he's the chief scientist and co-founder of Sun Microsystems. He's got an article in there, Why the Future Doesn't Need Us, keying off Ray Kurzweil and others, saying that the automation is coming, or the technological systems of production are coming at such a rapid pace now that the labor input that we put such stress upon now, we're heading for a train wreck here, because we don't have an alternative way of distributing income. Does that make any sense to you, Ed, or you know?
Well, I think the role of automation might be a bit overstated.
Perhaps,
Human beings are a very ingenious species, and they always seem to find a way to make themselves useful in the production process.
Yeah, right.
In fact, one of my colleagues, Vasily Leontiev.
Yes, I knew the gentleman well. Yeah, no. I mean, I had the honor of doing a couple of programs. He was a grand gentleman.
Yeah. Well, he actually made a similar argument that that humans would become obsolete just like horses did when the automobile was invented and became widespread, and that just like the horse population declined dramatically in the early part of the century in terms of its role in the production process anyway, so would human beings decline in importance in the new era of technology. But I think by and large humans are a bit smarter than horses, and
well, I don't know. I've known some pretty smart horses. I'm not sure they're any smarter than my dog, I tell you. But anyway.
Or Jackson.
Or Jackson, my dog. Yeah, he's a real smart sucker. Yeah.
Yeah, we have a dog too.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you know, there are more and more people working in services now.
Yes.
And services are still pretty hard to automate.
Yes.
Well, yeah, perhaps so. Yeah,
I mean, it's possible, and some progress has been made, but by and large, there are certain activities that seem to still require, and probably will always require, some kind of human input.
yeah, it's really hard to posit a situation where no labor is involved all at once in one fell swoop. It wouldn't happen like that. But to address the question of one as that it's a problem in that we don't address it adequately, and we don't have an alternative way. Our systems and our system of organization, our structures, our architecture, our institutions are all predicated upon assumption where that is the glue that holds the social order together. So it could be that it's as threatening as the heliocentric view of the universe was to the means by which people got identity under an assumed geocentric view, and that's what makes paradigms perhaps a very ticklish and difficult thing, because people get their identities by, in that older Copernicus, it was they worked out classic elliptical pathways that could explain the seeming differences and so forth. But in this case, we would work vociferously to try and maintain the old order, which is fighting a movement which is larger perhaps than our efforts to try to hold that together, because we don't have the intellectual leadership that can introduce us into a new reality, is what I'm sort of getting at. I don't know.
Well, no,
we could do boondoggle and make work, and we could build pyramids by human labor if we wanted, or...
Well, no, I think that's a very telling argument, and I'm not going to deny it. I mean, I think it's even deeper than that, because people do get their identity from their work.
Indeed.
Exactly.
And, so it's much more than simply a source of income. It's really deeply embedded in our consciousness of self.
And for anything that would threaten that, like a thing called binary economic analysis of the way things ought to be organized, and any political person, leader, or something who might want to take that on, it would be a tough fight against the embedded institutional systems and the way by which people get identity. So it might explain why there's been, intellectually and otherwise, some resistance to the ideas that are contained in your paradigm that you and Rodney, or you and Bob have put together.
Howard, just on jobs, I'm certain that there are always the necessity for care for other people. I think education is a direct human contact. There'll be many service jobs, whatever the situation is in future. But looking at a particular time scale where the ability of computers and robot technology and nanotechnology to do extraordinary productive features, some of the questions which arise there are, if there is this productive capacity, I happen to think that at the moment it's already there to solve the world's problems. It's here at this moment.
Right. Yeah.
But the potential, Bill Joy and others, Ray Kurzweil and others, they can see the potential in future. And there are several questions which come out of it. One of them is, well, if there are this productive capacity, how do you distribute its income to others?
Exactly.
And then there are also questions of with this massive economic power being narrowly owned, whatever your view of politics, unless you're some sort of autocratic, it's really very worrying indeed.
Well, it does seem that way, and I just wonder if it is, because we also were just at a meeting, and it was sort of bringing up Mr. Kelso, who was the father of this binary notion, Louis Kelso and so forth, and But he also was in league or in tandem, in a certain sense. You could see it with another great systems thinker, was Buckminster Fuller of the 1960s.
Indeed.
And among the many things that he proposed or tried to get a measurement of, and this is strange, maybe an economist could address it, is he said that we were approaching, he said, the haves and the have-nots, and I don't know, this would maybe be just prima facie, just not accepted by anyone, but he said that our technological increase with the steam engine and then the first war and the second war, that we were approaching a point where we would have a technological capability that made it possible for us to see in the abstract that there were, in fact, in terms of our ability to provide life support, as he would have called it, more haves than have-nots in the world. That he said, he posited that we were crossing that monumental divide back around 1970.
In potential
and there
capacity.
was something blowing in the wind, that there would have been more, we would have had the ability to provide, there would be more than 50% of the world's population on a system scale could be seen to be haves, as opposed to a historical situation where there have been ever thousands of times more have-nots than haves always, but we crossed that line. So that we're transcending the ironclad rules of scarcity, which seems to be the basis of much of what economic thinking is, the allocation of scarce resources. And is it a problem that we're coming to a situation where our technological success has rendered us in a situation where we have non-zero sum possibilities because the situation, we have this abstract capability, but we don't have a financing or an economic system that lets us do what we're capable of doing to serve the human population, and it's almost built-in schizophrenia.
I think binary economics would prefer to say not that we are transcending, but that we're capable of transcending. It's a very important distinction, because if you go outside Europe and the USA, there's poverty in strata in the USA, and there's poverty in particular places. But in the bulk of the world, and I'm taking these figures from a recent World Bank draft report, 20%, 1/5 of the population live on under $1 a day. And however you explain that.
Yeah, but
and 40% under $2 a day.
Yeah, I wasn't saying that is the reality that exists in the world. I was saying the abstract, technologically augmented capability of providing. Archer Daniel Midland ads say, the problem in the world isn't producing food, it's a political or economic problem, how you can get the food to the people, and that there's a great pent-up demand among the mass of the people of the world, but they don't have the wherewithal to buy, which can be automatically, almost in many instances, produced, and we didn't have that knowledge base in the past.
Amartya Sen got the 1998, I think, Nobel Prize winner, and he got it for saying that in Bangladesh there was an extended period of famine, and it wasn't because that there wasn't food, it was because the inability of the people there to buy the food. And that and this apparently shocked the conventional economics. The assumption in conventional economics is that the market mechanisms work and that everybody can work and the labour will produce enough for them to actually get sufficient food. And Sen says,
law.
Well, they think it is Say's law. In fact, conventional systems stitch up Say's law, and he's only actually implemented in binary economics. But Harold, so Sen rightly got his Nobel Prize for pointing out in the world it's rather important to look at people's ability to be effectively economically productive. And if they only have their labour and do not have any capital ownership, they can starve. That's what he was saying, I think.
Yeah, but he also said that there was never a famine in a democratic society.
Interesting.
I think his point was that it's political, the political apparatus that was largely responsible for many of the famines that we experienced.
But it's not the political, it used to be called political economy, and much of our leadership, geopolitical and otherwise, are taking advice from the economic, and it's a political economy. They used to call it political economy. The two are closely intertwined, aren't they?
Oh, yes,
so
yes,
then where does the responsibility come, and how much do the economic advisors to the political or power leadership of the world, come to that? And then how is it that we got to this sort of a situation, in your view, Rodney, that if this was the case, why is it that we have allowed such a thing as such a plutocratic concentration of ownership to apply in virtually, even in our economy, which we call a democracy, and much less, and it's a pattern for much of the world, 20 families own certain countries in Latin America and so forth.
I think the essence of the thing, we're back to this idea of who or what creates the wealth. If everybody is taught that jobs create the wealth, and implicitly that jobs are available and that jobs will always provide a reasonable income, then a combination of what you're taught and sheer necessity means that you go for jobs, that you look for jobs, you hope they'll be provided, and if you don't, right, then you're back to Edward's excellent point.
Mm-hmm.
There are questions of not only loss of income, but there are questions of loss of status and identity.
Yes. Yeah.
And one of the things in binary economics is that it provides a new way by which people can develop their identity in different ways and get their status in different ways in the eyes of others. But I accept Edward's point, as things are at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
If people lose jobs or outside the conventional job structure,
Mm-hmm.
they may have depression, and they may well be perceived in a negative way by other people. I accept that.
We just took a terrible ride on the NASDAQ the other day. It was up and down like a roller coaster at Coney Island, and it was very, upsetting, and the markets are very uneven, and whether or not that business cycle could be any way brought under some sort of a more reasonable context. But what has been lacking that, why then, if this is the case, that you would be in a sense arguing that we don't have open entry in terms of open entry to capital markets.
There's no such thing as a
free market. And the idea that, you can take some savings and put it aside and invest it, and if you do and you watch it carefully, it'll grow. And why haven't more citizens availed themselves, or why have not more citizens been able to avail themselves of access to the options, stock options and other kinds of things that our leadership did that made them so wealthy? Why haven't more people just done this in the normal flow of events?
There's a great untruth. Massive rhetoric is devoted to asserting that there is a free market today. It is profoundly not true. There is an unfree market. It is unfree, unfair and inefficient. And let's just take the one point, the unfree. By normal conventional economics, a free market requires a large number of participants. And in the case of something like this, you're looking at the effective number of participants is the tiny percentages we've been talking about. If most people in practice are not able to participate in the capital markets, you cannot have a free market.
Why can't they?
Well, they cannot, because this essence of the thing at the moment is that they're not able to acquire the key thing for investing, which is collateral.
They haven't got anything left over from putting food on the table to invest. They just don't have anything left over.
A large amount of capital investment is done by the use of credit, and those who have collateral are able to, in fact, to go on investing. And companies either invest out of their existing earnings, which benefits the existing shareholders, or they borrow using various forms of collateral.
Well, Ed, maybe you could come in here. Why do you think it is that we've gotten to a situation where, as you would have characterized it yourself, that we have a plutocratic pattern of ownership of this which is increasingly the technology or stock shares or whatever capital assets to be so concentrated in what can be characterized as a plutocratic pattern? Why has it developed that way, and why haven't we had a Homestead Act or something where there was a real dissemination of economic democracy, which in many people's minds is more important if you're economically empowered and independent than it is to be able to have a vote within a representative democracy in a political context. But what is your assessment, or what is your thought?
Well,
you study the disparities and the trends also.
Yeah,
I guess that's unsettling.
Well, that's really a tough question to answer. I think part of the reason is that most people just don't have enough income to save from.
Right, yeah.
I mean, most people barely manage to maintain their consumption with what they earn, so there's really nothing left over to put away in a savings account, or let alone to buy stock.
Yeah.
And over time, those who have it, for whatever reason, and they're the ones who are able to expand it because they don't have to consume it. So any income they get from it, they just reinvest, and that's how it accumulates over time.
Yes, and they would have a collateral that could be put forth if they wanted to go to a lending agency or something, and they would be able to put themselves on the winning side of the logic of business finance, which is, we make an investment today which will pay for itself out of its future earnings. And if it doesn't, or won't, it's not a good business investment. They can take advantage of that and have their reservoir of money just growing more and more all the time because they have the ability to tie into that and the folks don't.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think as Rodney indicated, that if you have a lot of money, then you have collateral, and you can borrow and expand it even more. If you have nothing, then it's almost impossible to borrow,
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
and there's no way, literally no way to start the ball rolling.
Yeah.
To start that initial accumulation, which then leads to greater and greater wealth over time.
What would be, well, I wonder if you have a summary of that, or what you feel, or what would be, if it's important, what would be institutional changes or thoughts that could be introduced maybe within the intellectual community or otherwise that would make it possible for there to be, instead of just accepting that idea that the situation is such as natural law or something, that the poor will be poorer and the rich will get richer and richer, accepting that there would be something that could be done that would irrigate the economy and get past the dilemmas that stand in the way of the democratization of capital assets within the economy. What changes could we begin to think about, do you think, that might help us get past the conundrums that have led to the unhappy, as we view it that way, situation that characterizes the present? And
Well,
this applies on
yeah,
a world scale,
yeah,
I guess, as well as America.
Well, in fact, you mentioned one mechanism that was very important in the 19th century, the Homesteading Act.
Yes, wasn't that
Ah.
amazing? That
And,
was
Very remarkable.
yeah.
Sorry, that was really remarkable. Yeah.
And a more recent example in our history is the GI Bill,
Yes.
passed right after World War II, which created the greatest expansion of home ownership in our history,
Mhm.
and perhaps in the history of the world,
Mhm.
just by providing credit to returning veterans.
Mm.
That was the demarcation of the law.
Mhm.
Home ownership rate in this country increased by almost 20 percentage points, which is
Really?
quite remarkable. So, I mean, those are two examples of public legislation that was very effective in expanding wealth and ownership in this country.
Yeah, many people got into that through appreciation on real estate values that they had. And I wonder, would the FHA have tied into that general frame of laws and so forth that would have made home ownership more possible to greater numbers of people? Or is it another example that would have been a policy that could be adopted to expand, or an example that we could draw upon in order to try and get at some of the ways in which we might productively move ahead?
Yeah, yeah. In fact, no, the FHA has played a major role in this as well. You know,
That's the Federal Housing Administration, I guess, as you know.
but let me just say one word.
Yes,
you know,
please.
when you look at wealth accumulation, it's interesting that you know, at least in the United States, really the key factor is owning a home.
Yeah, it
That
has
has
been.
really been the major way people have started their accumulation of wealth.
Yes.
It's
Get into
been-
the upper middle class a little bit.
Yeah, and you see, once you have a home, you have collateral.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you
and
can borrow.
you can leverage it then. You can start doing
Exactly.
some leveraging
Yes.
buyouts or
Yes.
something, yeah.
And you know, if you look at wealth accumulation patterns, there's, you know, the biggest distinction is between homeowners and renters. It's sort of
Okay.
the
Yes.
biggest cleavage.
It is,
Yeah.
Yeah.
In terms of,
because that's the source of equity that the people have in the economy. In
Yeah.
America. Now that is not working as well as it did at some times in our history, I
no,
believe.
no. The homeownership rate has been virtually flat for 25 years. Maybe it's gone from 65% in 1975 to maybe 66, 67% today. It's barely budged
Yeah.
when you consider what happened in the period right after World War II, when
Yeah.
it went from 40% to 62 or 63%.
Yes, yeah, that was a very expansive time, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was, yeah. How do we account for this, and what does it tell us about the larger issue that we're trying to address of how can we think about not only home ownership, but let's say democratization of access to capital credit that could begin to get the folks in on the logic of business finance and the way the financing of our ongoing and forward-moving economy is on the ownership side of things, do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think I support Rodney's view, and maybe in certainly certain modified
Sure.
form.
Sure,
but
yeah,
I
it's gotta
think
be
I
balanced,
think
yeah.
you know, stock option plans, for example,
Mhm.
is a very potentially potent way of further expanding ownership in this country. Now it's become the preserve of just the higher paid workers in this country, and also executives or sort of high-tech employees.
Yes.
So it's, you know, its implementation is very limited today.
Well, I
Maybe
think that's the way Bill Gates got his money. I think he has a salary of $500,000 a year or something. It's all stock options that built that great pillar of wealth.
That's
that's
right,
out there
yeah.
in Seattle, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so if it's good for them, is it generally true, could we say, if it's good for the plutocrats, if that's the term, or the people that are in that position, can it be, you know, that it's good for them, it's good for the folks?
Well,
We could build a democratic way of beginning to involve them in the same logic that makes the wealthy, we could make the poor better off by the same logic?
I think there's a lot of potential to do that.
What about that, Rodney, you think?
Well,
Are we getting off base here, or?
no, getting right on. I don't know what the metaphor is, but hitting right on it.
Yeah.
There are other aspects of this. The poor is a sort of general statement, but if you can individually improve economic capacity of individuals, if you take the position of women, particularly in the world in general, that there are issues there which are not just a question of freedom from pain and getting food and things, but questions of status and issues which impinge on even things like population levels. It's almost just an obvious fact that if there is a reasonable standard of living, reasonable health service, reasonable education, and a degree of status for women, not complete equality with men, just a degree of status. When you have those factors, then a population level will stabilize. Binary economics has nothing to do with questions of contraception or abortion or anything like this. These are matters for the individual. But very important is just that question of altering the economic position of women throughout the world. And binary economics does this. So it's not just a question of the poor, it's a question of the balance between the sexes. That's another aspect.
Well, binary economics implemented would affect the income and wealth of all people, including women.
All people, but it's as well to bring out the particular aspect for women, because that might not be understood or might be hidden in the statement about it affects all people. And it applies to the middle classes as well. I mean, this is not just a question of people who are poor. The basic principle is everybody must come to own capital and in due course have a substantial income from capital.
Yeah, which would bring the, if that's the case, why can't we, if we've got this disequilibrium and we have this wealth, as you say, with Mr. Gates and the others in this country, or on a world scale, the United Nations program, they indicate that it's on a world scale too. You got 240 families that have the wealth equal to 48% of the population of the world, or some such absurd thing. But if they have that kind of thing, why couldn't we do like Mr. Tobin says, a Tobin tax, or do it? Or I know, Ed, I think you ought to be able to address the idea, because you've had great thought about how we ought to think about some sort of a wealth or a taxing on the wealth in order to redistribute. I guess it would be through the through government systems, and that we traditionally have done in the name of social welfare or social democracy or something. And what about, you know?
Well, yes, I have proposed a tax on wealth as one way of trying to reduce this tremendous concentration of ownership in the country. And I think, though, that the only that the other side of it, though, has to be tied in with it. Simply taxing wealth of the rich, while I believe it's virtuous in its own sense, but unless it's tied into some mechanism to distribute that wealth to
get at a structural question. Why it got that way. Let's try and make it.
Well, but it's got to be some mechanism to redistribute that wealth to the poor, even the middle class in this country. And you know, the government, the federal government in the United States is politically just unwilling to do that.
Well, we do have some, if we were looking at the whole human scenario, or the federal or the national system here, we do have political institutions that have some say. I mean, it seems to be sometimes that that the the fund guys and the corporate guys are just walking this planet with big league boots now and so forth, and the government seems to be off. It's the end of the welfare as we know it, Mr. Clinton said, and these kind of things. But the political power that it represents could be used for some purpose, and the political federal structure would be important in terms of setting up an institutional framework that would fill a gap that has made this this democratization of capital ownership not possible in the past, Rodney. I mean, there is an idea of a reinsuring capability the government could have to back up a growing commercial insurance against binary loss on binary stock issues. That would be something like that would be required so that the mass of the people could get over the big hand that comes in front of them when they say you have no collateral. There'd have to be some way that they could be protected against that.
Apart from changing an attitude of mind, there's virtually nothing new in binary economics except the idea that there should be an insurance, an effective substitute for capital. Now, and yet
for collateral.
For collateral, yes.
Yeah.
Sorry. And even for that, there's nothing new. The parallels are in the Federal Housing Association, FHA, your Federal Housing Administration, is a parallel. So there's nothing virtually new on that. But you're quite right, that is essential. Can I just quickly refer on the wealth tax? The view of most binary economists is that there should be no wealth tax, and that the existing rich would benefit from greater payout of earnings. The key point in binary economics, for the view of most of them, is that there should be a reallocation to the rights of ownership for new capital as it comes into being. In other words, the existing wealthy would get increased income and increased benefit. There would be no wealth tax, but that other people would be able to come to own capital. But that said, it is fair to say that there are other binary economists who agree a version.
Yeah. Well,
a relatively moderate version.
Yeah.
Jeff Gates, I believe, has stated on, I believe in the program with you, Harold.
Yeah, we've talked with Jeff Gates, and he's got that book. A lot of people are paying attention to.
Well, indeed, and
the ownership solution.
The ownership solution, a remarkably informative and comprehensive book.
Yeah, yeah.
And well written.
Or I just saw that Mitch McConnell in the Senate now, they had a bill. I saw it as I went through Times Square, and they said that they've put a bill through the Senate, or they say it's going to pass both houses, that they're going to, I don't know if the term was require or encourage or something, that for employers to give stock options to all employees.
Oh,
I mean, that would
times
be a
are
use
changing.
of political power. In order, I was very taken by that. I'm not sure exactly what it connotes, but that bill's working its way through, and they said it's almost certain to passage because there's wide acceptance of it. But that seems to me to be
it's a good sign.
A sign that's encouraging, you know. I mean, if it's moving that way. But there's a lot to be done in order to do it. And first of all, is this idea, in your view, then, of getting over this idea of we could set up an institutional framework where it would be safe, as it were, in a certain sense, to involve more people in this productive process of involving capital assets, and it could be insured against loss that in a way that they can't do because they don't have the collateral, so it restricts it to those who are already wealthy. There has to be some way to get through past that. That's a big hurdle,
well,
but it's also, it would only be called for if one could understand that there's a change that is needed on a large scale rather than just drifting with the times, which is the default position of most of our political leadership, it seems.
People make many off-the-cuff objections. They say, well, the poor mustn't have all their eggs in one basket, and there's this risk and that. In fact, if you look at the detail of binary economics, it's well established that it is possible to do it, and to do it in ways in which there will be an investment on behalf of this or that individual, and they are not threatened should the investment go down because of this collateral substitute.
And they want a casualty insurance industry against insuring as you do insure against a fire loss or something.
And
that
there
it
can be a whole new financial industry, Harold, coming here.
Now that's going to ring a little bit tricky on a lot of people's ears as we think of the savings and loans and things like that, particularly if we put the federal government behind, backing the faith and credit of the federal government behind an insurance industry against business loss.
It is the view that there are, whereas there are existing market decisions have to be taken, each one vetting and saying, will the investment pay for itself? There are probably even more considerations as to whether the investment will pay for itself in binary economics.
Well, as it stands now, the investment capital is in very few hands, and that has certain kinds of consequences. It's easy to drift with that and to become sycophant to the institutions that those people have and to the job thing. And so in order for there to be a change in a paradigm sense, it is one that does call into question ideas that would, in a certain sense, call for major change, and you would have to have some notion of what has changed that makes a major change possible. And I think it's possible to just nominate this era as one in which we live in a time of spectacular change that is going on and does call for some new thinking and investigating new thinking and not having closed eyes and blinkers on in terms of coming out of the history. Ed, I don't know what you think.
Yeah. Well, I think you've hit the nail right on the head that we're now in a new era. People call it the new economy, and I think labor will probably get progressively less important over time, and that we have to think of ways to expand capital ownership in this country. And you know, I'm very sympathetic to binary economics and Rodney's proposal, and
it's worth looking at.
Yeah. And if we can promote stock ownership plans, particularly within major companies, I think that would also be a very effective way to expand capital ownership and dilute its concentration.
Yeah, right. And also it could be, if we haven't got time, we're running out of time, but it could increase the capital formation capability we have to do, which perhaps we're technologically capable of doing, don't have a financing systems that let us do it, and it would also give a greater demand. We didn't get a chance to talk about binary growth, but a greater demand in that money and income is in the hands of people who have a great deal of pent-up need to buy the things that an automated economy can produce.
Yes,
so
that's
you get a demand stimulus. Right?
That's the essence of binary growth.
Right. So this is something that's really an important time. It's a crucial time and an interesting time in terms of the evolution of universal events. There's a Chinese proverb that says, "Spare us from living in interesting times." And I'm afraid we missed that one, because these are certainly interesting times and calls for new thinking. And I just congratulate you and Bob Ashford for having come up with the book. And of course, we give tribute to Louis Kelso, who came up with it. And Edward Wolff, I really thank you very much for all your work on work at the wealth and disparity of income and wealth in the world and this country. And I congratulate you and appreciate very much your coming in, talking with Rodney Shakespeare, and saying you think this is an idea that might be well worth looking at by greater numbers of perhaps of your colleagues.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you for having me.
Not at all. My pleasure, and it's been your pleasure to have the Perceptions in again, as I could. On my far left, which is Dr. Edward Wolff. He's at the Starr School. Is it the Starr School of Business?
Just New York University.
Well,
I think,
it's a really good business school, and he's at the Starr School at the New York University, and is the writer, and again, I would say the leading proponent of quantitative information about the disparity of wealth and income in the United States and the world. And on my immediate left is Rodney Shakespeare, co-author of this book, Binery Economics, that we've been happy to discuss here. And we thank you both very, very much for coming in.
Thank you, Howard.
Thank you.
And we on Conversation invite you to tune in. We'll be coming back again next week. That's it for this particular segment of Conversations. But again, we invite you to tune in, and thank you very much for viewing. Until next time. Okay, so we hit on a lot of things, but there's
Edward's information.
Yeah.
It's the key factual basis upon which all these arguments ultimately and discussions must be based. And,
well, it's an interesting, I like to nest it with some others, like Fuller and McLuhan and some of the others and that sort of thing. But the binary thing, it seems to me when I get around to thinking about it, it's not the design or it's not the technological capability we have. It's the financial system that is going to permit us to really involve humanity in this technologically oriented system. It's a big challenge. I mean, it's perhaps a leading intellectual challenge, because that's what seems